In this video, I'll introduce the construct of implicit power motive. Implicit power motive is an unconscious motivation to influence others. It's also called need for power. Two things to highlight here: implicit and motivation. First, by implicit, we mean an unconscious, innate desire for dominating, influencing, controlling, and impressing others. Everyone has an implicit power motive. It reflects a basic human need for control and autonomy. In an experiment, participants with power more readily moved an annoying object compared to subordinates. Not everyone has the same level of desire for power. You've probably seen or interacted with someone who has a strong drive for power. It's fixated on having control and domination and enjoy the hustle to get them. And someone who thinks he is smarter than the crowd and is entitled to be endowed with the power to make decisions on their behalf. John Adams said, "The love of power is insatiable and uncontrollable. There is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty." A need for power and dominance over others is one of the major motivators of behaviors. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet. In social groups, the alphas are those who have a dominant role or position within the groups. Social dominance is associated with heightened activity in the dopaminergic system associated with motivation. When monkeys were housed individually, they had similar dopamine levels. Putting the monkeys in a group, we create hierarchies among monkeys. In the emerging hierarchies, dominant monkeys who were on the higher rank of hierarchies had increased levels of dopamine, increased energy, and vigor. Second, by motivation, we mean those who have high power motive derive pleasure from having control over the behaviors and circumstances of others and enjoy being persuasive and asserting social influence. It doesn't necessarily refer to dictatorial behavior. Rather, they derive pleasure from having control over the behaviors and circumstances from others by rewards and punishments. They enjoy asserting influence, undue influence included, over others. When you see someone is highly motivated to deliver rewards, such as job promotion, and administering punishment, such as job termination, you know that they have high implicit power motive. People generally want upward mobility in organizations. Why do most people want to climb up the organizational hierarchy, but only a few people want to move downward the hierarchy? An increase in the rank of organizational hierarchy produces a surge of dopamine in their brains, giving them a feeling of gratification. The motivational system in human brains has been linked to reward processing and the hedonic tone. Once the motivational system is activated, people have increased energy, vigor, and effort, which facilitate responses and sustain goal-directed behavior. They enjoy being a commanding figure and calling shots. The sheer pleasure of being in charge is motivating to people, which can lead to ostentatious display of an outsized personality. What's the relationship between implicit power motive and leadership? High power motive is essential to effective leadership. After all, leadership is about influencing others. Power holders have the ability to allocate or withhold resources from others. To some extent, leaders must be interested in influencing others in a controlled way. Otherwise, they become authoritarian. With high self-control, leaders have a high power motive, make their subordinates feel strong rather than weak. Authoritarians, on the other hand, make people feel powerless. They tend to use threat and coercion to influence people. Power-motivated individuals are more likely to ascend to higher levels of management in large corporations. They promote social success and have a desire for influencing people. David Winter did a study on U.S. presidents' implicit power motive. The findings suggest that power-motivated presidents were more likely to be rated as great by historians. I plotted the data in the Winter's article. Washington, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Truman, and Kennedy, for example, were all highly rated presidents in greatness by historians, whereas Grant and Harding were at the bottom. Power-motivated presidents tended to have more great decisions cited by historians, such as the purchase of Louisiana by Thomas Jefferson, the abolition of central banking by Andrew Jackson, and the attack on business trust by Theodore Roosevelt. Winter's study also reported that the U.S. presidents whose first-term inaugural speeches were more saturated with power motive were more likely to have confrontational foreign policies. Those foreign policies could end peacefully. They could also easily end in war. Individuals with a high power motive are more institution-minded. Let's refresh our memory of the definition of power. Power is defined as the asymmetrical control over the actions and resources of others. Institutions, organizations, and public offices are perfect platforms to satiate people's strong desire for asserting social influence. People with high power motive tend to run for office and get elected. Their behavior is driven by a strong desire to influence others. When I hear people say, "I want to be a leader because I can change XYZ," this type of statement can imply a high level of implicit power motive. There are billions of people in the world. If I have a chance, I often ask a question, why you, not other candidates, can make a difference in X, Y, and Z. The answer would be something like, my experiences make me so unique, or I've always wanted to do X, Y, and Z, and I know how to do it. Of course, everyone in this world is unique in a unique way. Just because you self-claim you know how to do it, and even if you truly know how to do it, doesn't necessarily mean you are the right person to carry it out. What's alarming about a high power motive is that we may end up with leaders who care only about power. They only care about influencing others and are not at all concerned about the needs of the people they're supposed to serve. This is why psychopaths who are bold, egotistical, and have impaired empathy and remorse thrive in organizations. I'll discuss psychopaths and narcissists in a different video on trait theory of leadership. Here, I focus on the danger of selecting people with high power motive whose power motivation is not oriented toward the institution or organization that they serve, but oriented toward personal aggrandizement. High implicit power motive doesn't necessarily make an effective leader. The power motive must be disciplined and controlled, so it is directed toward the benefit of the organization as a whole and not toward the leader's personal aggrandizement. How to tell a person who has a high need for power can make a good leader rather than a psychopath. You can ask them to imagine in writing stories of them exercising power and see the signs of controlled action or inhibition. If a high power motive score is balanced by high inhibition, stories of power tend to be altruistic. The heroes in their story exercise power on behalf of someone else. This is the prosocial aspect of power. It is distinguished from the personalized aspect of power, which is a characteristic of individuals whose story are loaded with power imagery, but they show no sign of inhibition or self-control. They exercise power impulsively. They are over-rude to others. They exploit others sexually. They are interested in collecting symbols of personal prestige, such as big offices, fancy cars, and decorations that display proudly their history with the powerful. Deciding who becomes the leader of a team, we need evidence showing that candidates have strong power motive and, more importantly, have other traits as well. How to collect the evidence? If you think you can find the evidence by looking at their resume and asking candidates questions in interview, you are wrong. Whatever information you gather from the candidates' job interviews is mostly inaccurate, compromised by their inflated view of themselves. The evidence is more reliable if you ask their subordinates about whether the candidates make them feel appreciated and whether the candidates reward them properly and fairly for good performance. Above all, strong candidates should have demonstrated that they foster among subordinates a strong sense of team spirit and a strong sense of pride in working as part of a team. If a candidate creates and encourages this team spirit, then the candidate would be your top choice of the leadership position. Moreover, leaders' implicit power motive needs to be greater than their need for being liked. People with a strong desire to be liked are the ones with a high implicit affiliative motive. For an organization to function effectively, those who manage it must apply rules universally. That is, if they make exceptions for particular needs of certain individuals, the whole organizational system will break down. People with a stronger desire to be liked than to influence others are precisely the ones who want to stay on good terms with everyone, and therefore are the ones most likely to make exceptions for particular needs. Former President Gerald Ford justified his decision of pardoning Richard Nixon by saying that Nixon had suffered enough. Ford was responding as a leader who empathized with Nixon's needs and feelings. The findings in sociology suggest that people whose need to be liked is stronger than the need for power does not make a good leader. This kind of leaders create low morale because they don't understand that other people in the office will tend to consider exceptions to the rules as unfair to themselves, just as many U.S. citizens felt that it was unfair to let Nixon off and punish others who were less involved than Nixon was in the Watergate scandal. Here I use the results reported in David Winter's paper to plot the U.S. president's power motive and affiliative motive. Kennedy had the highest score of both power motive and affiliative motive. George Washington had very low power motive. That makes sense. Otherwise, he would not voluntarily relinquish his power of being the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, nor would he voluntarily step down from the presidency after 2 terms and return to his farm. Washington could be a king, but he chose not to. Lincoln and FDR had higher scores of power motive than the scores of affiliative motive. They had a strong desire for influencing others, and they were comfortable with saying no to others. TR had a very low score of affiliative motive. This may explain why TR brought 44 antitrust lawsuits, breaking up the Northern Securities Company, the largest railroad monopoly, and regulating Standard Oil, the largest oil company. Presidents Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, and William McKinley combined had prosecuted only 18 antitrust violations under the Sherman Antitrust Act. In this video, I introduced the construct of implicit power motive. It is an unconscious motivation to influence others. I also discussed how to select effective leaders based on their implicit power motive and other motivations. Leaders vary in their implicit power motive. Power is motivating for good and bad. David Winter wrote in his book titled The Power Motive, "Power is like fire. It can do useful things. It can be fun to play with and to watch, but it must be constantly guarded and trimmed back, lest it burn and destroy." It is up to us to make wise decisions as we select leaders who have a strong desire to work for the organizational interest instead of using organizations as a platform for their own personal aggrandizement. If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.